Welcome to Contemplative Crossfit Podcast. We just started the new 90 days bootcamp. This bootcamp so far seems like an upgraded version. People are more emotionally mature.
You met at a hologram, bruh?
And today is the weekly review. Some topics discussed are staying present through contact and feelings, the geometry of a moment, how karmas are generated and exhausted, how to put the 12 links of dependent origination in practice, the limits of vipassana, do-nothing meditation, self-inquiry, and meditation apps, resting and recognizing through the practice of Mahamudra, what are the 10 Bhūmis in Mahayana, why you must let go of Nirvana to reach completion, to train at the higher Bhūmis. Apparently the first Bhūmi is anatta, right? The 8th Bhūmi is the immovable, which are Arhats. 10th Bhūmi is like Buddha, a cloud of Dharma, yeah. More on the concavity of the self-view, the difference between Arhats, Bodhisattvas, and Buddhas, taking on and untangling other people's karmas, virtue, unconditional relationships, and friendships at first sight.
The review this morning focusing on establishing in this first week, and it's really an emphasis on contact, introducing the earth element, routing into our feelings.
This whole week we've been instructed to just sense into our contact, right? But what is contact? To sum it up, if you're having an experience right now, there's unavoidable contact between you and reality, right? Your senses are firing all the time. If you're thinking, mental activities is the contact. Seeing, visual field is contact. Hearing, and then sound is contact. Touch, smell, taste, whatever the case may be. And you're grounding yourself in direct contact with the quote-unquote present moment. But since there's no separation anywhere, a better way to put it is that reality is always contacting itself, or that contact is always contacting itself. And in the context of this practice, we categorize contact as the earth element. If you're in tune with contact without deviating, you feel a sense of groundedness. And water is grounded on earth. And wind rests on water, but space, the space-like nature of mind, doesn't rest on anything, but manifests all the other elements. So the following week, we can investigate water and the air element, and then the fire element, which both illuminates and burns with the karma's conditionings to reveal your true nature. We're doing alchemy here, brah. And these elements are just analogies to represent different modes or different densities to experience, different ways that the minds aggregate.
This week we've been pointed at the contact, right? Firstly, we point at the contact, and we see how what we call to be present moment is this concept of contact, or the verbiage to contact, like the verb of it. So present moment, contact. So then we see, we are always in contact. It's not even like with what. It's as if like we are here and then something is coming into contact. It's the entirety of our field of experience is the contact itself. Yeah. So that means that we experience so-called the present moment. We experience the contact. And then how do we come into contact with our contact? Meaning, how do we see it clear and clear? That's why we're starting to talk about lucidity of the contact.
So we're talking about training up the ability to have high resolution and definition to sense into contact. What is the sensorial texture or the quality of each contact?
So then we start talking about what is obviously the routing that can help stabilizing the situation is through feelings or vedanā, sensations. Before it becomes like thoughts, before it proliferate into the sense of identity, what is it? What's it like?
Now, it's important to note that feeling, which is not the best translation from the Sanskrit word vedanā, which is something much more basic and subtle than emotions. Usually when we hear the word feeling, we automatically associate it with emotions. But emotional states is already something that's further down the chains of becoming. It's already after you start to react to the raw sensations of feelings. And we're going to get into how raw sensations compounds and forms into more solidified emotional and mental states later. And this is, again, part of understanding the nature of compounding phenomena to understand non-conceptually how the self-view or even reality is constructed from the ground up, all the way from the unconditioned to the conditioned, from the unfabricated to the fabricated. And how there's evolution and patterns to the way phenomena compound and compress, which creates a sense of separation and also makes up your karma, your conditioned becoming. Even though karmas are ultimately just appearances, or quote-unquote empty, it's important to expediently understand how karmas are formed due to causes and conditionings to reach liberation. Because you could definitely explain it away without just empty anyway. Sure, there is feelings and emotions, but when we use the word feeling in this context, we're really speaking of the qualia of sensations, tuning to the raw sensations of the moment and the qualia of your experience, which can be as narrow as the feeling of a particular part of the body and as broad as the entirety of your field of experience. What you tune into doesn't matter all that much. What matters is that you understand the mechanism of how contact and feeling co-arise. Even when you feel like you aren't making contact with anything, which is impossible as long as you're alive, well, how do you know that you aren't feeling anything? there's contact there. You're contacting the feeling of not feeling anything, which is a feeling, right? Even when you're experiencing like formless awareness, whatever, there's contact and a qualia to the experience of being formless. Even when you're proliferating, right, you're contacting the feeling of being lost in thought. There's a pressure point in the head, right? That's contact. So you can never not be present. To deescalate mental proliferation from compounding further, instead of trying to stop thoughts, analyze the contents of thoughts, or react to thoughts, simply feel into thoughts as context, the raw sensorial texture of thoughts. Instead of getting caught up in the content of a painting, investigate and feel into the texture and the quality of the paint itself. And you can actually do this with every sense door, right? That's the same analogy as seeing the mistaken image of a snake to be just a rope. But of course, you gotta self-invalidate and see through the lack of inherent existence in even the rope. The way that I look at contact is through the lens of the 12 links of dependent origination, just to put it into context. We're not gonna get into all the links, but the fifth link is six sense space, which is this six sense spheres of like sight, sound, thought, touch, smell, taste. And we say six sense spheres because if you really examine it through a direct experience, what this moment is, which is synonymous for what you are, and what reality is, you're more like a four-dimensional hyper-spheroid. There's the three dimension of space and the one dimension of time. And Einstein will agree with this, that the space and time can never be separated, right? It's always one fabric. And the six sense spheres in the non-separated, non-dual state can be experienced as one unified sense door perceiving itself. And with enough yogic training, you can actually access even higher dimensions. But from the ultimate perspective of the unborn nature of mind, all dimensionalities are appearances arising through, with, and as the unconditioned, which has zero dimensions, yet at the same time no dimensions or no conditionalities can touch it. And this sixth sense sphere, it's always in contact. Contact with what? You can say with reality or with itself. There's no separation anyway between you and reality. The fact is that if you have the sixth sense spheres, there's inescapable contact, not just with the quote-unquote present moment, but you're in contact with all the causes and conditionings that allows this moment to be, which includes everything in the quote-unquote past and future. Causes and conditioning isn't linear. It's more like a mandala that transcends but includes the three times. And contact always arises with feeling. So the six sense spheres, contact and feeling, they're codependent arise together.
Fuck this world, fuck civilization, fuck your city doors, put people in the movie theater, packing the clubs. I'm gonna shoulder press you off.
Going back to the 12 links of dependent origination, which explains how the cycle of samsara is created and perpetuated, and understanding this experientially will inevitably lead to liberation. This first week of training, we're focusing mainly on examining the links 5 to 7, the six sense spheres, contact, and feeling, because everything after that is when phenomena start to compound, when you start to twist and compress Buddha nature into the self-view, with craving, clinging, grasping, which leads to becoming, and so on. Now, I've talked about in the past the two darts of experience. The first dart is just raw sensations, raw sensory data, right? The second dart is the start of the selfing process. It's when you start to react to the sensations, rarefying and compounding sensations into mental and emotional states by adding concepts, stories, meaning-making, interpretation, and identities to the feelings, to the raw feeling. That is the first dart. Now it becomes, I feel angry at whoever, I feel excited about so-and-so because of this and that. Now, if you can attend to the sensations of the moment before you begin to react to it and not deviate to be absorbed into the so-called present moment, then we can prevent further compounding and fabrication and proliferations that will eventually lead to suffering. Can you simply rest and recognize what's going on in this moment before reacting? The moment the mind starts reacting and grasping onto sensations due to ignorance, the mind immediately creates a split in consciousness, which creates more splitting in experience, perceptions, feelings, and cognition. Anything experienced through this dualistic perception and obscurations becomes compressed, like an Ouroboros where compounded phenomena that compounds more phenomenons ad infinitum. Untangling your karmas begins with the right view through the wisdom mind. Otherwise, you're just using conditionings to try to cure conditionings. You're stuck in a catch-22 cycle. There are only three ways that you can react to your experience, right? I like this, I don't like this, which are just two sides of the same coin, because clinging is aversion. Or even rarefy neutral feelings and be jaded or like cling onto equanimity. After craving, there's clinging, right? Clinging to things that are perceived as pleasurable, right? Reinforcing a cycle of suffering. And then we have becoming, which means that the habitual tendency or the action of all this chains of dependent arising processes is already cascading into an action that otherwise is just gonna be too late. By the time an action is being given birth, or not even action, even just a state of mind has been giving birth, then you are already pretty much completed a cycle of samsara. So then if we can de-escalate the situation at the point of contact, before we start to react with I like it, I don't like it, or neutral, to prevent the further proliferation of mental emotional states, which then leads to habitual tendencies and so on, then we have a chance to redirect or reorient our trajectory, the trajectory of our conditionings, of our becoming, so to speak. I guess another thing is like, we talk about purification, right? Purification, absorption, and view refinement. That's the three pillars of our practice. Three things. In the first week, our contact point is the point of absorption. The sensations, just feeling to the raw sensation. If we can just absorb into the raw sensations of the present moment and allow whatever needs to be processed, whatever we haven't been able to look at, because we're constantly going about our days and proliferating these feelings and desires or whatever by turning on the TV, watching Netflix, or scrolling on the phone. We never really sit down and let these feelings come up without reacting to them, without trying to find more content, more reaction to counterbalance or try to get rid of the emotional or mental state. So we sit down and just be absorbed into the contact, into the sensations, and then do not deviate. Just stay with the present moment contact. And whatever needs to come up, we allow it to come up, allow it to process. And that is the purification process. And the more you are absorbed and the more you purify, the more refined your view is. And the view is just the nature of mind, the right view, right? And the clearer your lens of perception becomes, then it goes into this positive feedback loop where all three elements roll into one. And then the more refined your view is, the easier you are able to be absorbed, and the more you purify, and on and on and on.
Just talking about contact is interesting because there's so many ways we can wrap what it is we're trying to say about what contact is. Like there's everything you said, there's everything Frank said. It's like you could call contact like touching the immediacy. You could also call it the basis of lucidity. And like there's all different ways that you could investigate how that is contact. I think with starting this week, coming into this kind of training, it's like everybody is coming from different starting conditions, and a lot of people come from this starting condition of isolating or distinguishing points, entities, matter.
Or they chop reality and create this distinct chunks of like past, future, and present, right? We have this sixth sense sphere, and through constant contact makes up a moment. But a moment is flexible and fluid, it's not static, it's constantly unfolding, right? Which means that this four-dimensional spheroid, which is you, or space-time itself as a single unity, is constantly fluxing and fluctuating and shape-shifting, and it's aware. Time vibrates into space, and space unfolds in time simultaneously. The temporality of becoming vibrates into presence, while presence unfolds into being. So the present moment is like a whirlpool. It has patterns made up of intersecting lines of sentient. A formless shape arises through movement, a momentum perpetuated by the intersection of past, future, and present. And it's alive and spontaneous. A lot of times when people engage in practices where, they try to stay present, they're holding their attention to zone into the present moment, they're actually rarefying and make substantial the now, making it a static thing, in which they then create an observer to further objectify it. That's to create a separation, right, between you and the now, which means it's not the now anymore because there's a delay, or they create a reference point between the past, future, and present. Anything you can infer to as the now is already not the now, because you can't step into the same river once. You don't need to do anything to stay in the present moment that cannot be grasped, but paradoxically, it's all there is. The so-called present moment defies both existence and non-existence. By increasing your sensitivity and be absorbed into the present moment through contact, you see that contacts are constantly unfolding, morphing, vibrating, beaming with presence and luminosity and self-cognizing. And as you ground yourself and establish stability with contact, eventually experience becomes less solidified and reality starts to flow like a stream. And this is where we get into the territory of the water element. And this flow of energy, due to countless webs of causes and conditions interacting, has a volition which creates patterns of formation that leads to perception, conceptualization, and meaning-making. And this is the air element. And all of that constitute your ways of becoming. But without grounding yourself in contact, the mind won't be stabilized and collected enough to do the proper investigations to reveal insights into not just what you are, but how you are. When all the causes and conditions from the elements are ripe, we enter the territory of the fire element, illuminating, burning away, exhausting the karmic patterns. We'll discuss these elements in future episodes.
When we talk about the 3 times, it's like, are the 3 times ultimately distinct like that? And if not, then what is this present moment? And how does our relationship to the present moment, these techniques, just like our relationships to thoughts, to these energies that we label as particular emotions, how do they condition our experience, the dome of our experience? They further proliferate stories, they prescribe meanings, they condition our becoming. They proliferate subtler and subtler levels of this sense of a truly existent, separate entities, reality, units of matter. Could it be as simple as just the immediacy of now encompasses all 3 of those things?
It's like the timeless transcends but includes all 3 times.
Beyond but not excluding. Like, is it as simple as just resting into then these points of contact, resting into the immediacy of the basis of what these resources are, sentient resources of lucidity? You're bringing lucidity to the breadth of reality, like in gathering and unifying these resources. You're revealing the actuality of our experience, like beyond that bondage of our dome, because that dome is like conditioned by our karmic flow. Then it's like, what is it to be beyond that self-view of being, beyond this referential attempt of capturing or curating becoming?
If we train like this and we really take our time with this element, stabilizing sensation, then when we talk about conception or conceptuality, then we can really feel the texture of that dome.
Concavity is actually just another word for view, right? And if you haven't been watching our content, when we say view, we don't just mean like concepts or ideas or worldviews, like something intellectual. Like what we mean is your entire reality, and that creates this invisible dome, this ontological container. And everybody's walking around with this dome that concaves inward because of the reference point between subject-object, between this or that, that self-referential process that is pretty much what defines the self-view. And this dome, and we can get into how even Arhats still have some kind of a dome, right? Because they prefer Nirvana or samsara.
I may be wrong, but that's how I understand like the thing about Arahat with the dome, right? So if I understand correctly, Arahat has what's called abiding Nirvāṇa. Nirvana means the cessation of the dome. So that means Arahat is endlessly ceasing dome.
Oh, okay. So their concavity is that they have no concavity. That's like the 8th Bhūmi kind of territory, but this is a bit more controversial. We'll get into that later.
That dome is also the conception, right? Previously we was talking about like meaning making, but then when we talk about meaning making and going beyond meaning making structures, people just make the going beyond into a new meaning making. But what's being asked right here is like, can you feel the texture of that dome? That pressure of being pressed, metaphysical pressure.
The reason why I feel self-conscious or have this metaphysical pressure in social settings is because your dome is colliding with other people's domes. Everything inside the dome is the known. Everything outside is the unknown. That's why in the process of convexing this dome outward, you can feel like you're having ontological shocks or existential fear. But you just have to accept it, like unconditionally. And establishing pure open contact. And that means you have nowhere to hide. It means the death of separation. Being in present merges and you become completely unimpeded and intimate with a million things. And I think we call that love, where even the distinction between the conscious and the unconscious gets erased.
Accepting that present moment, even accepting that tension, that confining pressure of the self-view of experience then starts to relax. Somebody shared that in this morning's review.
I think David was asking a question
in
regards to, he said, let's just pose a very simple question. How do you get in contact with the present moment? And let's say if you're a viewer here and then you don't understand this question and your mind start to proliferate. Well, what does it mean? How am I going to answer it? I feel self-conscious because I feel stupid. I don't know how to answer this question. That in itself is already contact. So if you can just tune into the shape and the texture and the qualia of the sensations of being confused or even being lost in thought, like you said, the pressure of proliferation, and see that as just more sensations, then you are doing the practice right. So you can just sit on the cushion for like 20 minutes or an hour and just attend to the context, sustain their attention without the observer and without trying to change or fix anything in experience or do anything extra. Just rest and recognize. And whatever absorptions that you experience will just come as a byproduct. or take this practice off the cushion everywhere you go. You have billions of contexts to tune into. To find the middle way between effort and effortlessness, you don't want to dissociate from the context, neither do you want to indulge in them. So the insight is that you're always in direct and open contact with all of reality directly plugged in, right? There's not a speck of experience that it isn't contact. The phrase everything is perfect as it is comes to mind, right? There's variations in patterns and textures and the qualia, which gives rise to different forms of vibration, which gives rise to matter. But all compounding phenomena are the continuous unfoldment of energetic vibrations. So you always absorb because everything's interpenetrating through and through, and it's not possible to be otherwise, right? When you're watching TV, being on your phone, having a lot of thoughts versus no thoughts, different samadhis and jhanas are just different styles of absorption, different ways that the mind aggregates. When you're staring in the clouds or the sky, there's zero distance, it's just mind, right? We're so conceited that we think about the future as if it's going to happen the way we think it does, or we ruminate about the past if it's really what happened, as if it's not just all happening in the quote-unquote present moment, which cannot be found. It's just how much do you want to resist that? People always say they want to be seen, they want to be intimate. The moment you realize that you're 100% intimate with all things, then they're on the way back into their own concavities.
You mad? You mad, bro? You mad at a hologram, bro?
So this is kind of like samatha vipassana, but you're not trying to dissolve anything or even trying to expand, because reality is constantly rising and ceasing anyway. You cannot out-dissolve creation, right? But you do have to rest and recognize it. Resting is the fitness to be with whatever's rising, whether that's equanimity, highs or lows, and recognize the nature of mind, the luminous emptiness that is beyond but includes expansion and contraction, beyond coming and going, as well as having the non-conceptual wisdom into the nature of compounded phenomena and how the mind aggregates through form, feeling, perception, fabrication, and consciousness to create the present moment reality, which I talk about in previous videos. And this is also not exactly the same as do-nothing meditation, because you're not even trying to let go of anything. When you try to do the do-nothing meditation, there's still a doer in there that's trying to do nothing, which is doing something. This approach is beyond the duality between doing and non-doing. When you talk about right view, right effort, or right contact, we're talking about the middle way, that which transcends but includes both sides of the extremity. This is probably the simplest and most direct method, but at the same time, it could be quite advanced, right? If you want to put a name to it, it's called Mahamudra in Mahayana. The more you rest, the more you can recognize, and vice versa. When rest and recognize fully merge as one, and if you can sustain that throughout all situations, then you're truly practicing Mahamudra. You're not even trying to do the self-inquiry or look for the self, as if no self or impermanence are objects to be obtained, right? So this method self-invalidate vipassana and do-nothing meditation or self-inquiry, but that doesn't mean that those practices aren't valid. But ultimately, like all methods, rest and recognize must be self-invalidated too, right? When recognition closes its own causal loop, because there is nowhere to rest and nothing to recognize. The mind is completely awake without you trying to do anything. This also doesn't mean that you don't need to put in the reps until both the remedy and the cure are both invalidated. And then you invalidate even the process of invalidation. In our Contemplative Crossfit 90-day Bootcamp, we formally sit up to 4 hours a day, followed by an hour to an hour and a half discussion with progressive overload, systematic the way that an Olympic athlete peaks for a competition. Not to mention off-the-cushion training. It's an invisible monastery beyond time and space.
Like you mentioned body scanning, it's like focusing and refining a point of concentration into this tinier speck of solidity, thinking eventually you'll get to some final speck of itself. Contrarily, trying to expand, you think you can get to, liberation through going beyond, and then that implies like this event horizon, but then that event horizon constitutes our dome.
The only reason why you want to expand is because somehow you feel contracted or you're trying to escape from something.
Yeah.
So there's already a reference point. The way we used to talk about vipassana is that you are doing the vipassana still from the vipassanalizer. Of course, ultimately you have to vipassanalize the vipassanalizer too. But most people don't do that. That's why they keep going to retreat for like 30 years, just strengthening the vipassanalizer, right? There's an observer that's observing the object of meditation. So there's still a reference point between, the apprehender and the apprehended. The word mindfulness is really taken out of the context of modernity, is just this, very constraining effort of honing everything down into a tiny speck of a concentration point in order to dissect every single sensation, like the way modern science do when they try to dice and slice the reality in atoms, the reductionism. And even when we use these apps or meditation apps like Headspace, right, just following these instructions, you're still reinforcing this perceptual aggregate, for example, which is the dominant way that our modern society conditioned us to over-engage. Like being on your computer or on your phone all day long, dissociating. You got these instructions. Until to breathe in, you're breathing. Until to breathe out, you breathe out. You look here, observe there. I myself used meditation apps for many years and I loved it. But the benefit's only expedient, right? You might feel a temporary relief. But affliction, with this basic split in consciousness, exists in neutral, positive, and negative states. You're not fundamentally reorienting your relationship with embodiment. Right? You want to reassociate. You're still not coming in as you are and just feel and contact reality as it is directly. You're still reinforcing your root formations. And this is how mindfulness can affirm the mind's own delusions. So root formation are holding patterns, the compounding phenomena are compounded and conditioned over and over again, that they serve as foundations for views. They're like blueprints at the pre-verbal and subconscious level that boots up this dome, this view, which then creates the geometry of your reality, depends on how your mind aggregates. Now, the first three links of the dependent origination process are ignorance, formations, and consciousness. So if you're ignorant of this process, of how this moment is created and how this leads to a cycle of samsara and how phenomena compound, which leads to like craving, grasping cycles of becoming and the birth of a karma, habitual tendencies, and so on, merely by being conscious, we're already predisposed to partial views and a divided knowing of reality, right? For instance, even the very basic sense of moment-to-moment experience. Consciousness is already splitting itself into distinct chunks of time. So when we apply like this dualistic kind of mindfulness, just observing the breath, first of all, you're not really observing the breath. You're observing your own fabrication of the breath. If you really contact the quote-unquote breath, it's just raw energy and just raw feeling and sensations that we've been talking about, you realize that there's no such thing as the breath, not the way that you thought it was. What you thought was the breath was just the concept of the image of the breath, right? There's not even an exhale and an inhale at the subtlest level of contact. So if you apply mindfulness in the way that most people instruct you how to meditate in the spiritual marketplace, your mind is constantly tracking from one moment to the next while dividing itself into the observer and the observed and into like smaller and smaller chunks, right? So what consciousness is tracking isn't the present moment. It's tracking the projection or the appearance that is rooted in the formation of, say, time is real or is linear. And then we continuously find targets to confirm its own formation, right, on the cycle go. The most common root formation that almost everybody holds in the modern world is reality. And we think that there's a reality that we can all agree upon. Without the right view, you can practice until your balls fall off, but you just be reaffirming the same self-becoming cycle, right? And what is right view? It's just the nature of mind without reference point and beyond all extremes. But with this training, day one, we establish what the right view is. Here, we are resting and recognizing, absorbing into the present moment through contact and sensations and feeling, which are the same thing, in a very relaxed way. Right there, immediately, you can already start to have little insights into the nature of mind. We say, okay, if I'm not observing the sensations are simply aware of themselves, then where is the self? Where you can increase your sensitivity to the contact and then see how, actually what is meant by contact is not something that's solidified at all. All contacts are impermanent, without a self-essence, and is constantly shape-shifting, right? Every contact lacks inherent existence. It's just empty space vibrating, but that's what gives rise to form. And then you can start to examine things like, where's the separation, the line between, let's say, my butt pressing against a chair. That's a pressure point. That's earth element. That's contact. But then if you increase your sensitivity, you'll see that there is actually no line. Whatever lines that you think you find is just more, swerving sensations. Same thing with the boundary between your body and the environment. And then you start to get these little insights into the nature of mind. All these insights accumulate, right, into a bigger chunk of insight, and then the process start to roll on exponentially. Every contact is, I guess, the manifestation of countless webs of cause and conditioning, which means that every time you have a contact, what does that mean? That means you are always connected. You are always interconnected. Like just in this moment, the podcast occurs because of this contact. This contact is the codependent emergence of all the causes and conditioning that brought us here to this present moment via contact. So the moment you have contact, you know that nothing stands alone, right? Everything's interpenetrating. Dependent origination. Where karmic or mind streams interacting and creating contact points, but even using the word point, quote unquote, isn't quite accurate because there are no points. But non-separation doesn't mean that everything is one either, right? Because it's beyond both the one and the many. People say everything is one are still making a distinction. There's still a view there, the view that nothing is a distinction. I think somebody asked in a discussion, how did this come about? How did the present moment come about? And my answer was relationship, right? Not just human to human relationship, but just the fact that Nikajuna say emptiness are born out of emptiness things, right? And emptiness is also dependent origination, right? If we both have a fixed identity or essence, then we can't come together to manifest each other. Ultimately, it's just trust in reality. How do you make contact reality? Ultimately, you have to trust. You have to be completely honest with yourself because there's nowhere to hide. If you truly make open contact with reality, you die. Which means your self-view collapses, because that self-view, even though it is part of reality as well, is what filters reality. It's the stain, right? It's the stain that obscure reality. But ultimately, there is nothing but the ultimate liberated view, right? Which is the nature of mind. So the entire process can be boiled down to just purification through absorption, and that leads to view refinement, right? So once you see through how there are actually fundamentally no view at all, then you are able to, in a very flexible and fluid way, take on any view that you seem fitting in this moment, depending on function. It's that fluidity of aggregation that really is the ultimate way of being, rather than just verifying certain state of like, oh, just no self, because you got to see through the lack of adherence in self and no self. And take full ownership, right? If you take the non-doership view to the extreme, what do you get? You get full ownership. It's reality owning itself. That's when we get into that space of, wielding with our agency and thinking with our thoughts and so on. Chen said like the higher Bhūmis, the 9th and 10th Bhūmi, and even beyond, all has to do with relationships. Because I think, can you describe the whole spin and ping thing about the 9th Bhūmi, about how you literally have to... it's like when the subject object becomes very flexible, it's like you are able to take on subject or object and then take on other people's karma, so to speak. And a lot of what we do here is exactly that. Just tuning to other people, untangling the co-resonating karma.
好莱坞里面跑得最快的人是谁？不知道哎。Tom Cruise。Tom Cruise。Tom Cruise。
Papa Sambhava said that he eats karmas for breakfast. But at some point, it's not just your or my karma anymore, right? Karmas are codependent rising. It's like you consume samsara and you spit out nirvana.
Into the chest, out through my hole.
But that requires you to, get in the muck and then, pretty much be entangled with the karmas of other sentient beings.
Yeah, just threw up Tom Cruise's viscerals all over the floor.
Which is something that Arhats don't do, right? And that's why they don't go beyond the 8th Bhūmi.
In his mind, the powder thing must be his consciousness, went up to heaven.
But the 8th Bhūmi is like pretty much what Arhats are stuck in, quote unquote.
Yeah. Tom Cruise, leftover. Are you admiring my authenticity, Tom? Plyometric, I'm Tom Cruise orchid. I didn't know I'd come at you like that before, huh, bro? It's plyometric, I'm Tom Cruise orchid.
Right? It's not like Arhatship is like better or worse, right? It's just a different game. But if you're going to follow the Mahayana model of the Bhūmis, then apparently the first Bhūmi is anatta, right? The 8th Bhūmi is it's called the immovable, and the 7th Bhūmi is called like, I don't know, gone far, and the 10th Bhūmi is like Buddhahood. So Arhat, they are quote unquote cloud of Dharma, quote unquote stuck at the 8th Bhūmi. So, but then it's great, right? Why can't we just all be like, Shravakas or solar realizers? Why do I have to transcend Nirvana, so to speak? What's wrong with just being in this the concavity of no concavity, so to speak? This total vaccine out, the convexing. Maybe that could be a gateway to our next topic, which is the difference between solar realizers, Shravakas, which are Arhats, Bodhisattvas, and Buddhas.
Conventional limitation could be like if a person is following that kind of trajectory of, say, Pratyeka Buddha or Shravaka, then they may be very cold-hearted, lacking in compassion, lacking in responsiveness. They don't care in that way. It's just my realization, what is it about me? They're just abiding in Nirvana in that way. The ultimate limitation is they don't have fearless joy.
They have this very subtle fear of samsara, right?
So they don't have fearless joy. They don't have that kind of joy, stability, samadhi that they can roll with the muck.
So when we talk about completion, then it's about being a complete human being, right? If you're a complete human being, then you can have fun in the muck Just like when I told my client, he's like, okay, Frank, I know what you're talking about. I found the divine, the poop. My inquiry back to her was, can you find the poop in the divine? Or, the preference for nirvana really is the fear for samsara. The two sides of the same coin.
Not that this realization is wrong, because ultimately it's the same realization, but it's this orientation that's incomplete in the sense of you're abiding in the eye of a storm rather than being the eye of the storm. Like you're not bound by the world because you're not in it and of it. You don't have to be in a cave. You can be in society and in your solitude. And that's what's we're distinguishing here between abiding and non-abiding nirvana. It's like the returning from the mountain to society.
The way I understand it is that Arhats still have a very subtle affliction, right? In that they still make the slightest distinction even between nirvana and samsara. I think Khan made a really good point once about how on the Bodhisattva path to Buddhahood, the goal isn't to completely eliminate all emotions or desire, right? Bodhisattva retains some of his desires, quote unquote, not in the grasping kind of way that creates suffering. It's the creative and the reproductive energy that creates everything in the universe. So practitioners on the Mahayana or Vajrayana path utilizes this energy as a catalyst to train at the marginal gains of their fitness in order to develop powers or cities or relational skills for the sake of all sentient beings. So Arhats, in a way, their kundalini juice is all dried up, so they don't have any more sentient resources to fuck all sentient beings. And this is not to say that Arhats are inferior, it's just it requires a different kind of contemplative fitness.
The returning to samsara, but then having fully instantiated the inseparability of the two.
So the eighth Bhūmi would just be like you just pure presence, right? And then
pretty much.
And then the ninth Bhūmi and onward, the 10th Bhūmi is like you bring the being back again into present until they merge as one, and you're able to almost at will manipulate your present to not just be yourself, kind of
other empty territory.
Yeah, other empty territory. Then now you can also be other people. Yeah. I actually had an interesting experience in regards to that a couple of days ago when I did a one-on-one call. I was talking to this woman from India, and then when we started talking, she just I could kind of sense into her energy, and then the more I could sense into the energy, the more she was telling me that she can sense into my energy. It was like, Frank, your energy is so bright, I can really feel it. So then I actually was feeling like she was inside me, I was inside her. And then like we were just not separated by the screen at all. And then she was in this like God consciousness, like kundalini mode, right? And then that's the territory like I've been in before, so I kind of know what it feels like, even though like I don't really have that kind of energetic shifts anymore. But then when I tune into her, I could literally feel that bliss, that just like kind of like kundalini, like God consciousness kind of bliss. Like literally, I was like, okay, I'm very familiar with this feeling. It almost feels like psychedelics, and the screenshot the more feels like acid. I was like, oh, I haven't experienced that in a while, but I was taking on her experience, and the more I did that, the more she was feeling whatever it is that I'm feeling through her, through me. And then we just became entangled. And then you almost felt a little, it almost felt a little sexual. I remember when Chen was like, I could get inside this so-and-so person I was doing one-on-one with. I could feel her sexual energy. And then I was really kind of feeling that sexual energy. But it wasn't, I didn't have a boner or anything, but there was just like a sensorial feeling of like, almost tantric. But I had no desire to fuck her, like, to be honest, but I could kind of just, in a very pure way, it's just like experiencing desire without the verification of just you being the subject wanting to fuck the other person. It's almost like the self and other become so entangled that you don't even need to fuck her. It's like pure desire without grasping. But it's almost like you're spinning reality all the time, to be honest, if you tune into it, kind of, right? It's like...
That's how it is. But then we see that we may not do it all the time because cause and condition not right.
Also, you don't need to do that. Just like Chen said, I don't need to go to the 10th Bhūmi. It's like at that moment, I was like, maybe I can try this pin and spin on with her because she's receptive. That cause and condition happened in that moment. But then when I'm just like walking around texting people, I don't need to do that. When I do the sits, it's almost like I am not doing it for myself anymore, right? There's no distinction between self and others, right? Just saying I'm doing it for others is already duality. And it's funny because when I did that with one of the actualized, she actually shared the experience of her actually crying and releasing some of her stuff. And then that was the session that I intentionally tuned into her. I was like, I wonder if I actually turned on the camera so I could see her. And then I was like, kind of just, I don't know, just, doing my thing. She had some stuff getting released, and I could actually feel that, right? And I knew that was happening when she confirmed it after. And this week, there was one particular sit that there was none of this is planned. Just like in the moment, it's like, I think it might be interesting to tune into this person. And then she told me that she cried again, and that's the only 2 times that she's cried. And she described how her nervous system, I don't know, just there were swerving movements, almost like a onset of a kundalini release. The swirling movement, it's like manifesting in her body, and it's just like something might pop, something along the line of that. And then I was like, yeah, that's what I was doing. I was doing the swerving thing in her body. And then, but I was like, I'm still new to this territory. This all just can be all just coincidence or whatever the case may be. But once you kind of become reality, it's like synchronicity, like every moment is like peak experience every moment. It's just so interesting, those territories. It would be completely inconceivable like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
I'm still new to this.
Territories.
Yeah, I'm still new to it. I'm still developing my sensitivity. But I don't want to say too much about it. Like the distinction between like synchronicity or coincidence, or what's supernatural versus natural, what's real and what's unreal, we just fall away. But I think you really got to be virtuous in this territory. And I did ask her, I was like, oh, are you okay with me doing this? She's like, yeah, I'm okay with it. But in this territory, it doesn't feel like it's like me doing to anyone. It's just a co-resonating kind of untanglement. But that's what's happening all the time anyway, if you understand dependent origination.
Yes, sir. But like that's why like in this kind of territory, we know how people can get lost in the sauce in terms of like emanation when they're not clear about self-emptiness or other emptiness. Then they may feel the presence of some sort of that they then say some sort of deity, and then the logic is not clear, and they say, I am that being.
Yeah, they would just be collapsing the experience of the divine or of other people into the self-view. That's when you don't have enough fitness or familiarity in neither the same nor different kind of territory. It's like you got to know how to be the separate self, be both people as one, be both in neither, and none of it all simultaneously.
Right. And that's why like in this territory, it's a lot of training and refining and build and maintain and refine that relationship, because it's like an entanglement that takes effort, right? So that's why like to do this, like you got to know how it is to be ourselves, and then you got to know how the other person usually feel, and then you got to know how it is coming together to generate a situation. And you got to know, like, as you walk through that, that not necessarily means that the other person will receive it. But then we'll have no problem with like increasing our own sensitivity, boosting it up and pinning and spinning either to other people, to situation. People are casting spell on themselves all the time. People are pinning and spinning themselves into concavity all the time. This type of nice Bhūmi pinning and spinning is that you are doing it so-called consciously.
Right. Just like with increased capacity, you're able to mandate all the cosmic conditionings.
I'm doing like the pin and spin thing with like Cosmos. And with all of it, it's like pin and spin here, but all the pin and spin everything. It's fun. It's like, where's the center of the mandala? It's you, but there's nothing there.
I've been calling it 10 Bhūmi Experience, but I don't really know. It's like all the, it's like the entire sentience. So every single line of cosmic condition of creation, which is equivalent to all the sentience coming in, like you can't be pinned to that, because then you're just beyond that, but you're not a part of it. You're all of that. You're the creator, the created, and the creation. That's the best way to put it. And also non. Okay. Yeah. You have almost like a spectrum of how you can completely just disappear and not be a part of it, or be fully part of it, and everything else is doing. There's a spectrum. Like that's a discipline thing. That how do you iterate that?
To make sense of the higher Bhūmis, we have to mention the so-called lower Bhūmis. So essentially, like from the first Bhūmi of feeling that abundance of joy, of no longer being fooled by that illusion of a self-view.
That's pretty much anatta. Yeah.
So then after that, what's going on is like the instantiation of that in so-called daily life, or integrating that through like the perfection of virtues. Like we now know our conduct. We now know the stream of karma, causality. I do this happened. So should stop doing that.
That's why after anatta realization, you just become more ethical.
A self-generated ethics, but that's also like not an instant click kind of thing, right? The whole point is like we say, like we can you demonstrate that Bhūmis, and then how much can you demonstrate it? Or somebody like really developing for Bhūmi, but not maxing out on the second. So that's why like, we require life circumstance and rolling with life to train the lower Bhūmis. Like even after anatta, like you still have to have a lot of unfolding. This is what the karma is. This is what the karma is. Like, oh, so I'm entangled in all of this. And you just slowly kind of unraveling that.
Training the maybe the lower Bhūmis after anatta just by being out in the world, filming people and hanging out with friends and stuff.
Conduct comes with the patience to slowly putting in the reps, and then have the kind of stability in just resting in the presence. Allow the being in the presence just dance with each other continuously. And then having the kind of prajna to cut open the concavity, and then now feeling the potential of what it's like to jump beyond concavity. So that would be like the bridge of the 7th Bhūmi.
That's when you start to investigate even what the concavity is, right? Because you can actually be pretty spacious, but then there's still a concavity of, like, say, the conceit of everything's awareness. There's still a kind of a bubble. So it's not so obvious, right? It's like, but then there's still some kind of a separation there.
If you also roll with suchness with stains, you just roll with life, and then
you need to work out, bro.
Then the dome itself becomes the womb for perfection. Before, the dome is like the prison, but then it becomes the womb for your own nourishment. By accumulating all of this, there's now comes a chance for enough sentient resource to make the leap of the 7th Bhūmi into the 8th Bhūmi of immovable. Concavity itself is in through. Right? So that's immovable, right? Because you're not even there to be moved.
You just seeing through that there was never concavity in the first place.
Yeah, you're decalcifying it.
So then it can be identitylessness, and then it can transform and fluctuate. And once you're not there, there could be so-called fear of samsara or hesitation towards like boosting up a dome again, or that kind of, I don't care. That kind of lack of compassion. So then how do we proceed? You have the ability to move beyond your self-view, and then somehow interest still flows. And then as the interest flows, there's a steady of the attention for it to spin, to reveal. That's why vision starts to come. And you can be with that vision and co-direct it, because now it's a training up of volition. Without the immovability, you don't even know how it's like to be beyond being, to just have presence. But then now that presence also have volition.
We're not trying to ultimately annihilate the concavity.
The whole thing about suchness with stains, we can have domes.
Even the meaning-making system, or the ontological structure, sense meaning-making system, is part of the genetic makeup of that dome, which ties all the way back to like root formations and afflictions and obscurations and obstructions. All of those different elements that makes up your present moment experience. If you're not in a state of total convexity, so to speak, would create a dome. And the difference is whether or not you see through that dome, or you have the flexibility to aggregate in a way where you can shift from this dome to that dome like an infinite shapeshifter.
To put it in the context of this bootcamp, so in the context of transmitting self-emptiness, part of what we're doing is gathering these sentient resources. There's an increase in the penetrative capacity of our view to penetrate these points of dissociation and distance that we create between presence and being. We suffer when this dome of reality, when this self-view calcifies. We come into these things and we carry a lot of these dualistic, binary ways of relating, of making sense.
Oh, you guys are so cute.
I think people tend to fixate on accumulating insight rather than recognizing the inseparability between insight and all of this relationship, all of this entanglement, all of these codependent, co-arising, so on and so forth, that there are these various dimensions or ways that relationships can be configured, like teacher, student, friend, audience member, so on and so forth. And then you take on the appropriate roles when the situation calls for it, invalidating what's not and not concretizing any one particular identity. Beyond this bootcamp, what we're doing at CC is attempting to relate nobly, right? We're training the virtues, training the perfections, and it's like through wisdom, through virtue, so that we don't need conventions to mediate this interaction, this relationship, right? It's like culture is a convention, law is a convention. Like we don't need to rely on appearances for a sense of security.
Right speech, right action, right livelihood. It means you gotta take the right or like the middle way approach to all of your life. Not just meditation, all of it.
This trajectory with the training to, train up and relate in this way, there's that, and then there's the fitness of being able to instantiate those qualities, instantiate the paramitas, the perfections, which is just this absolute synchronization with reality as reality. Best friends at first sight. For some of us, that can just be like too overwhelming. Best friends are just honest with you. Yeah, that honesty can be wrapped in different ways. Oftentimes, people aren't even open enough or have enough trust just with themselves, to be honest with themselves. They have some degree of this distance between themselves and that, or they just like dip out entirely. Because that accords with transmitting with the self-emptiness teachings. You can only be as good of a friend to others as you can to yourself. We've all seen like all these weird ways people have related with being confronted with like genuine friendship. They just don't have the fitness or the view to relate in that way.
I think a lot of times friendships are based on conditions where the appearance of friendships is more important. So we just keep telling each other what we want to hear to confirm our own appearance in a way. Appearance of what we conventionally agree to be quote-unquote friendship.
Would a Buddha be everybody's friend?
It's kind of like Buddha sent every friend request to the universe, but not everybody accept. Kind of have concept of relative friend and ultimate friend.
Yeah,
Buddha probably is ultimate friend with everybody, but relatively not the case.
Buddha would be an unconditional friend where if you walk away, he probably wouldn't care.
He might not go to everyone's barbecue, you know.